Hello, and welcome to the Green Shores webinar on strategies and lessons learned on nature-based projects in the Maritimes and British Columbia. My name is DG Blair, and I am the Green Shores Technical Lead for the Stewardship Center for BC. I'd like to begin by just giving a land acknowledgement of where I am placed in British Columbia, and that is in the ancestral and traditional territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. This webinar is brought to you by Transcoastal Adaptation Center for Nature-Based Solutions in Nova Scotia and the Stewardship Center for BC. It's one of a series of 4 webinars that we're bringing to practitioners in British Columbia and Nova Scotia and beyond as part of increasing capacity and understanding of nature-based solutions and green shores. For those who are not familiar with the Stewardship Center, our mission is to strengthen ecological stewardship and by providing educational, technical, and capacity programs and resources to organizations, governments, the private sector, and the general public. And we always do that through collaborative partnerships. We'd like to gratefully acknowledge the funders and partners who are helping to bring this webinar to people across Canada, as well as to our in-kind partners who we couldn't do our work with Green Shores without, including our Green Shores Technical Advisory Committees and the many members on our various project committees. So for those who are not familiar with Green Shores is a framework for designing and applying nature-based approaches to shoreline management. It can help communities to adapt to climate change and bring resilience to shorelines. And Green Shores fundamentally protects ecological and socioeconomic values of the shore. Green Shores promotes better understanding of the importance of healthy shorelines because, as we know, people protect what they know and love. Green Shores is based on 4 guiding principles. The first is that we want to preserve or restore shoreline physical processes, that movement of sand and water, sediment and water as it moves along the shore. We want to maintain or enhance habitat function and diversity. We want to prevent or reduce pollutants from entering the aquatic environment. So we want to take a holistic approach of the project site, and we want to avoid or reduce cumulative impacts. All Green Shores verified projects must meet all of these 4 guiding principles. I want to have a special shout out to Green Shores training. The training is offered both in British Columbia and Nova Scotia. Level 1 is an introduction to Green Shores. It provides an overview of shoreline ecology and governance, an introduction to the Green Shores credit and rating systems, and includes a visit to a local shoreline to apply that knowledge. Level 2 is a 2-day workshop that provides in-depth knowledge of the Green Shores credit and rating systems, Green Shores for homes, and Green Shores for shoreline development. And we do an in-depth application of these systems through a series of both desktop and field exercises. For more information on our training, please go to the website of both the Stewardship Center and Transcoastal Adaptations at St. Mary's University. And now I'd like to introduce our presenters today. Emilie Rose is a fish and wildlife technologist who is passionate about ecosystem health, particularly in coastal and riparian zones. During the past 2 years, she and her crew have constructed and repaired many living shorelines in Nova Scotia with expert guidance from Rosemarie Loans. Emilie believes that knowledge regarding nature-based solutions should be accessible to everyone, and she strongly encourages collaboration amongst professionals. Kyle Armstrong is a restoration ecologist with over 10 years of experience working in coastal and aquatic ecosystems. Kyle is a certified ecological restoration practitioner within the Society of Ecological Restoration's Professional Association. In addition to coastal British Columbia, he has done conservation work in Kamchatka, South America, and Southern Africa. He is dedicated to restoring and enhancing socio-ecological systems through community-driven restoration and stewardship research and environmental education. Kyle leads an amazing team of staff and volunteers at Peninsula, Streams, and Shorelines here in British Columbia. With that, I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter, Emilie.
All right, thank you very much for having me. My name is Emilie, everyone. I'm currently working as a project manager at Helping Nature Heal, Inc., which is an ecological restoration company based out of Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. And today I'm going to be chatting about sort of the lessons that I've learned while working on these living shorelines and while constructing them, the importance that I've found in stewardship, and as well sort of the challenges that we've come across and how we've found solutions to these or how we're currently working with them. So to give a little bit more background on who we are as a company and sort of what our approach is with this, is that it is ecological restoration. We specialize in living shorelines, but we do a variety of restoration projects. It can be restoring meadows, restoring forested spaces and uplands, but primarily it is living shoreline work and working in eroding spaces, whether it be coastal or whether it be on lakes as well, or rivers. We work mostly with homeowners and with individuals, but we do some work with municipalities as well. We have a project or a program called Shore Up, where a community gathers together, and it's kind of like a big workshop. It's tons of homeowners and tons of representatives from the community coming together, and we're building a living shoreline all together as one. And so people are bringing all of their different knowledge and experience and their interests into one space, and we're all gaining the hands-on knowledge and the skills to be able to then take it back to their own spaces and work in their own living shorelines and collaborate with each other. So our projects do span across the Maritimes and into Quebec now as well. And the main goal of what we're doing is helping people to heal their land and to build more of a relationship with it, which ties into a lot of the Green Shores principles as well, because it's people really getting in touch with their land and building that pride in being able to really build up the ecosystem and use a lot of natural approaches. So in terms of the ecological approach, that is our main focus in the projects that we're working on. There's a ton of different strategies when you're building a living shoreline or restoring spaces. So ours mainly is the use of plants and the use of natural materials, but there are tons of other ones using armoring and using different materials, and then the hybrid connections between the two. But I'll speak mostly to the ecological approach today. So a lot of the work that we're doing is doing it by hand and reducing the use of fossil fuels. So obviously there's a bit of fossil fuel use needed. I did speak that we're traveling across the Maritimes a lot, but if we can move a lot of things by hand and work together, it's a really great experience because we're kind of showing what we can do as people and how we can work with this space. And it feels a lot more personal to be touching everything by hand and to really be deeply involved with putting it together. It's super important to be educating people and to be sharing knowledge along the way, whether it be the community that's working on the project together or whether it be the homeowner. Because whenever we're putting together a project, it's really important that whoever owns that land or whoever's using that land understands why it's being put together that way and really feels the importance of it and feels the purpose of doing it that way. It's a lot more beneficial than just putting something together and then stepping back, because if people don't see the value in those habitat spaces and in the native species and see the beauty in that, then they're not fully benefiting from it and they won't be able to have as strong a relationship with that land. And so in having the ecosystem as well, we really want to promote wildlife habitat and kind of have it as a complete system when it's done. So in terms of sort of the lessons that we've learned in the space, the biggest takeaway that I have in working on these types of projects is the benefit of having a relationship with the land. So understanding and being able to respect the natural processes that are taking place. For sure, right now, there's a lot of stress around the amount of erosion that takes place, which is what we're dealing with quite a bit. The loss of native species, the loss of wildlife habitat. We were just recently working to restore bank swallow habitat, and people that have lived there for years are coming by and they're seeing less and less swallows every year. So it's difficult to see that happening. But something that's important to understand is that something like erosion is a natural process, but because of climate change, everything is sped up so much. So in order to respond to that, we need to implement these other natural processes like healthy decomposition, like having those root systems, and speeding up that as well. So adding in plants of different ages, adding in woody debris at different stages of decomposition. We want things that'll take a while to decompose, but we want things that are already a bit decomposed as well. Because in a natural ecosystem, there are all those different ages and all those different levels of things taking place. Part of having a relationship with the land as well is really being able to grieve and process the emotion of having lost something. Since we're working with homeowners quite a bit, sometimes we end up in a situation where they could have experienced a lot of loss on their land due to a great storm like Fiona. And these storms are becoming more frequent and a lot of them more severe because of climate change. And that takes a big toll on someone. If they remember a piece of land to look a certain way and to have been a certain way for years, and then they have a tree fall down or they lose a few feet off of their shoreline, it's really stressful. And so being able to grieve for it and to feel those emotions and then be like, okay, now we have to get back at it and heal it. It's that understanding that the land is living as well and that it has its own system happening. And so if we want to live in the space with it, we need to be able to give to it. And it's that give and take relationship. And I think in a lot of our shorelines and in a lot of our riparian zones, there's been a lot of take for quite a few years. And so this is an opportunity for us to give back. And the Green Shores program and carrying out a Green Shores project on a property is another great way to do that. It's building that relationship and giving back to the land in that way. When the land does become wounded after a storm and it, like perhaps a tree has come down or a big section of the shoreline has become scoured off, we look at it like a wound that has been opened. And so it's good to go in there and to be able to heal that space. And like I was saying before, whoever is using that land or whoever owns that land, getting them involved with that and having them patch that up and then being able to kind of observe the healing process and seeing plants return to that space and being able to nurture for that and having the knowledge that that space does need to be cared for. We try not to use the word solution when we're putting together our projects because with what we're doing, we're really not trying to solve erosion because it is a natural process and it's going to happen. But if we can slow it, if we can stabilize it, and if we can work with the land, if we can heal it, if it starts to erode again, you heal it some more, then we can build that type of relationship of sort of caring for that space and giving more into it. And we can't just plant things and leave it. We have to create space for wildlife to use the space as well. We talk about the poop loop. When you invite wildlife to come back in, and they start using the space, they're naturally depositing a lot more nutrients and a lot more seeds. So reintroducing plants, reintroducing a lot of the wildlife species, the decomposition, the seed, you're really creating that whole system again. So I think it's really important to take all of that into account and try not to leave out any aspect of that ecosystem. As for some of the challenges that we've run into on the shoreline, I mentioned before the use of native plants, I believe. And it's really great to use native species because when we're looking at these ecosystems, historically, these species have been able to thrive in these spaces. Even if they're currently stripped from that area, we have species, and the ones out here will be different, of course, from the ones where you guys are in BC. Or I saw someone's from Ontario, like all these different spaces. But when we're looking at perhaps like a coastal ecosystem, there are some species that are super resistant to salt and some that aren't. So being able to use species that historically have occurred in that space is really beneficial because we know that they can do the best job at thriving in that space and really securing it. But a big challenge is actually being able to access these native species or access materials close by. So for us, when we're doing work locally, luckily we have our own little native species nursery. But when we're traveling to PEI or to New Brunswick, sometimes it's difficult to access those. And so we try to look locally, and there's a little bit of trouble. Sometimes we have to transport it with us. But if you guys, wherever you are, want to use more native species, whether it's in your own restoration project or just in general on your land, if you can go to local vendors and nurseries, we can request for them to carry certain native species. But the only thing there is that we then have to support them. So a lot of people do want to carry native species, but the cost of bringing those in and caring for them when a lot of people don't naturally gravitate towards those, doesn't benefit them in the end. So part of that too is just shifting the mindset a bit in society, where for a long time we've always wanted to have these really beautiful showy annuals and a lot of non-native species. But there are a lot of native species as well that are really beautiful, that are gorgeous flowering species, and that can last year round and year after year. So one of the solutions for that I find is just a mindset shift and sort of banding together and supporting communities. Another one is collaborations between neighbors. So living shoreline projects are really beneficial, but they're more beneficial when multiple people are doing them, because then all of those root systems can link across a large space. And when you've got a linked system, it can withstand so much more than one patch of root systems can. But because there's less, or I would say just not enough trust in natural approaches right now, and I think that part of that is from a lack of knowledge being readily available to people. And so webinars like this are great, and things like the Green Shores training are great because more people have access to that information. And then it's easier for neighbors and for communities to collaborate and find a common ground, because when people are using similar methods side by side, it does hold up a bit better. And the other big challenge is access to funding, which we're seeing a lot where we are working a lot with homeowners. And I don't know that we've found an exact solution for that one yet. It's definitely a difficult one. I know that some banks now are offering eco loans for people, but when it comes down to it, when your options are kind of to secure your shoreline in some way, or to sell that piece of land, or to move your home back, that's a pretty scary decision to make, and it's expensive in a lot of ways. And so this is definitely one of the most limiting factors to doing these natural approaches. or any shoreline approaches really. So I think that having the community-based projects is really beneficial in this way, where everyone can band together and really share those skills and knowledge. And then more people can do whatever stuff that they can on their own land. And so to kind of wrap up overall my perspective on this, or what I've taken from this work, is sort of why stewardship is so beneficial to the space, is because that ecosystem is living just like we are. We have those ups and downs, and the ecosystem is going to have those as well. And so if we can have that relationship with it, then we can help it when it is in those lows. And it makes it easier for us to live in those spaces if we're able to really heal and benefit the ecosystem. And because we do have a responsibility to a degree to heal these spaces, because of the fact that we as a society have accelerated climate change. And so it's really great when we can even just spread this knowledge, or attend a webinar, or do whatever it is that you can to help have this information spread and become more accessible to people. And then we can, as a whole, do more restoration together. I find that it is also more benefiting to our own mental health, where eco-anxiety is huge right now. And it's hard when we're looking for a solution and looking for a way to solve things, that if we can build this relationship and have even just a control over our perspective on the situation, and know that we've done something and that we have knowledge on this and we've put in an effort in some way, I find is really benefiting, because we know that we've done what we can. And then again, just it increases the ability for us to exchange skills and knowledge. If there are multiple people in a community working on restoring a space on their property, they can collaborate with one another and they can exchange what's worked for them, what they've learned through the process. Yeah, and we can all just kind of band together as a community, whether we're on opposite sides of the country, and help each other out on sort of not solving this, but working with it and finding a way to be content overall, you know, and to feel confident in what we're doing and what we've done. So that's my slide. And thank you guys for listening. And I'm looking forward to hearing Kyle's as well, and to answering any questions that you guys have at the end. So I'll switch my screen off.
Thank you so much, Emilie. So interesting. Love to hear your perspective. So just a reminder to put your any questions you have for Emilie into the chat, and that we will cover those questions, as many as we can, after Kyle's presentation. So Kyle, if you'd like to share your screen and video, that would be great. Over to you, Kyle.
Thank you, DG. I'm just working on getting this up here. Is that it? Are we there?
We are there. Looks great. Thank you.
Right on. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for having me. And thanks, Emilie, for that wonderful presentation. Really a lot of overlap and things, conversations and things to learn from coast to coast. Would really appreciate being involved in a discussion like this, and as DG mentioned, the cross-fertilization of ideas, I think, is extremely important. So happy to participate, but even more happy to learn and keep these conversations going. My name is Kyle Armstrong, the Executive Director for Peninsula Streams and Shorelines. We're a small NGO based on the Saanich Peninsula in Greater Victoria, on the west coast of BC. We've been around for about 20 years, but we've really kind of expanded both in size and geographic range in the last 5 or so years. Yeah, and happy to speak to some of the things we're working on. Very quickly, would like to give a land acknowledgement on the territories that we work. We work with the Lekwungen people, and today's the Esquimalt and the Songhees, and kind of the Greater Victoria area. what is known today as the Greater Victoria Area, and with the Wasonic people, made up with the Sartlip Nation, the Sakem Nation, the Powhatan Nation, the Sayout Nation, the Malahat Nation. And we are very privileged to work in partnership with many of these nations on different projects, and feel that it really, really makes for a better product in the end, and a much better process. And yeah, just very privileged to work in these territories and alongside these peoples and nations. Yeah, we work, like I said, across Greater Victoria. On the left panel, you can see Victoria at the bottom, all the way up Peninsula on the right panel, across the many different watersheds and shorelines that exist with many different communities. I'm getting a flag that my internet is unstable. So if I start breaking up, maybe just slow me down. And yeah, we have many different projects that I'll be discussing, and we work with many different communities and volunteers across this region, which are really our lifeblood. We are powered by an amazing, amazing group of volunteers that really just help us to get things done. I wanted to bring up this slide. I threw it in really quickly at the last minute, but it's a pretty popular slide, a spectrum of restoration, ecological restoration, from the Society for Ecological Restoration. I really like it because it puts things into perspective, kind of helps ground your work in terms of, where are you on the spectrum in terms of trying to implement change or recovery of ecological or ecosystems. And I think for nature-based solutions, kind of applying it to this too. As an organization, we work in really rural to urban areas. We're often on the left end of the spectrum, and a lot of things are it puts a cap on kind of what's possible and what we're capable of doing. I like to challenge people to kind of find themselves where they are in that piece, and kind of think of the challenges and opportunities that are associated with each one. We work within 10 different municipalities, and they're both our partners and kind of our regulators as well. And thinking back on that last slide, a lot of what we talk about in terms of nature-based solutions, restoration, environmental enhancements, a lot of that in BC is regulated on the municipal level, stormwater, development permit areas, things like that. So as you're looking to get involved or thinking about how you could get involved more, certainly local government is an interesting place to play, because you can have a really large impact on the OCP process and things like that in driving your local government to create really more progressive policies that are forward thinking and accommodate for things like climate change. So with a combination of becoming educated on what the challenges are and taking a look at other progressive communities across that are comparable, and trying to push your local government to move in those directions is a really great space to work. This slide is, a nice little model that we take in our restoration efforts, in terms of, these are our 3 pillars. And, as we look to different solutions and projects and programs, we're always trying to implement these 3 different areas. Those being stewardship and restoration, education and outreach, and of course, research and dissemination. So one of these programs, and as we develop our programs, we're always taking those 3 things. They work really well to interplay with each other and strengthen our programs. The first program I want to talk about is our Rain Gardens for Headwaters program, where we essentially are trying to build green stormwater infrastructure in local communities and take it and put it in the hands of local communities. Often our green stormwater infrastructure, things like rain gardens, green roofs, things like that, are really heavily engineered and kind of gate kept by engineers and planning and engineering departments. And so our goal is really, for this type of stuff to work, this green stormwater infrastructure to work, it really needs to be built at scale. As we're trying to hold, cool, and clean stormwater before it enters into our natural systems, you're basically trying to turn the landscape back into a sponge and create surrogate wetlands. And for this strategy to work, it does have to be done at a large scale, and it does have to be backed by planning and regulations and things like that. So our goal is to bring as many people in around certain demonstration sites of rain gardens, have the community help design them, find them, build them, maintain them, and share about them. And hopefully, like a bug, it spreads. Folks start developing rain garden goggles and looking for different opportunities, and it happens across sectors, across government, and across communities. So these are some photos of kind of that process in place, working with our local school districts and scoping out different school places. Schools make excellent places to build rain gardens because they're run by the district, so you're kind of on more or less private land. They're educational hubs, they're community hubs, and they're fantastic places to build rain gardens. So working with the districts and different communities to kind of scope out some different rain gardens, we start building different lists and building that relationship with the school district and other bodies, community bodies as well, and landowner bodies and things like that, municipalities, to try to gain their trust in that we know what we're doing in a way, and that we don't have to overcomplicate things. And by simply incorporating storm drains, existing infrastructure into our designs, so that overflows, if there are really huge events, those overflows make it back into the stormwater system, and having certain safety protocols and design specs kind of built into our programs and build that trust. This was Campus View Rain Garden at a school. It's in the headwaters of Bowker Creek. Right across the street there in the left panel is Bowker Creek and the headwaters, an urban stream. And the school is facing a lot of flooding issues, lots of pavement flooding, kids basically swimming in recess during big rain events like we're having here today in the past week, would normally kind of flood out the parking lots. It used to be this huge kind of wetland area where lots of water accumulated. They built a school on it, and it still essentially is, but it's paved now. So you get basically swimming pools in the large rain events. So we worked with the district to try to, and students and community members to try to bring this back into more of a sponge type environment. So our basic kind of approach is we dig about ½ meter down, remove the soil, and then bring in really porous organic soil. You see that storm main that exists in the back there, that's our overflow. We'd raise that up a little bit higher to allow for more flooding to come in. And it's basically capturing all the water that flows along the bus loop, as well as a couple of other areas. We built, I think, 4 at this site. We brought the community in. This is a day where we had nearby students from the high school come to the elementary school, and we did some peer-to-peer learning. So we've been working with the high school students with an education program on rain gardens, talking about the why, what, where, when, how. And then with the younger students, they were able to kind of help put the finishing touches and plant the garden. This is another rain garden at Monterey Middle School. So we worked with the class, created a design together, and made it a really simple design. We made it quite big because the school district had plans to increase the parking lot size. So when they do, they can tie into the existing rain garden that existed. And we've essentially just cut a hole in the curb and allowed water to drain in. We blocked with a curb guider, we were able to kind of block water from entering the storm drain in the very back of the parking lot, allow it to flow in. And once the rain garden's full, we have the elevation so that it backfills and flows all the way back to the existing storm main. Again, working with students, educating them, and then allowing them to kind of participate in the design and construction and planting. Construction for this one with the machine was done over the summertime when children were away, but when the next class came back, we engaged with them, did it all over again, and did the planning. So really interesting kind of handoff between 2 different cohorts of students. And now we're working with the next cohort to do maintenance and design some signage. In the bottom left corner, we're also engaging with local community members, practitioners, other NGOs, our local nursery, Satin Flower Native Plants, and the Friends of Bowker Creek, who are paramount. So with this program, we partner with the different Friends of groups and different watersheds as kind of, drivers and keepers of the knowledge in terms of creating and making rain gardens. So the Friends of Bowker Creek were involved in construction across the phases of these rain gardens and have now started their 1,000 rain gardens program within the Bowker Creek watershed. So again, catching the bug and moving it along and pushing it forward while we're there to support, but now we're focusing on other watersheds. So here it is, this kind of evolving after planting. You know, they can take a little while to fill in. You get a couple of people wondering what the heck's going on here, and then over time they begin to fill in. So photo was taken, I think, a couple of months ago, and then the front one with the water just recently. So it's doing its job. It's holding and capturing water. It's nowhere near capacity. You know, only about a third of the garden is flooding, even in the biggest of events. And yeah, it's really been a really great project thus far. The next program I want to talk about, sorry about the image quality here, is the beach program. So this is our beach education and conservation of habitat program. One of the activities within this program is volunteers go out and they look for spawning species of forage fish eggs in the upper intertidal zone. On the top, we have specific salmon lands, and on the bottom, our surf smelt. They find the eggs through, you know, a methodology, a community science methodology. The data is, you know, we look for the eggs, we upload it onto the Strait of Georgia Marine Catalog through the Salmon Foundation. And to date, you know, over the history of this program, we've collected 1,000 samples, you know, 105 different beaches, with many different detections of both species, allowing basically really good data being uploaded for planners and anyone who's interested on that marine catalog with the Pacific Salmon Foundation to be able to go and basically see where these habitats exist, which really helps with our restoration efforts, both on a monitoring perspective, but also helping us target where our efforts might best be suited. This is the Songhees Walkway Pocket Beach project that I worked with DG and the BC Stewardship Center, Pacific Salmon Foundation on, the City of Victoria, the Songhees Nation, the Esquimalt Nation, Destination Greater Victoria, Realmax, our corporate sponsor, a whole bunch of different interests coming together to do some pocket beach restoration in the downtown Middle Harbor of Victoria in Lime Bay Park. Sorry again for the image quality. The one on the left is kind of a before. When we first came to the site, this is what it looked like. Failing riprap in the backshore, invasive blackberry. The sediment on the beach was basically broken down riprap, so really angular and sharp. Not a lot of sand or other substrate. No really forage fish spawning habitat there, and you know, not really underutilized by people in nature. On the right is kind of a historic photograph of what was Mud Bay. So this beach was part of a much larger beach complex. You can see how drastically it's kind of changed in terms of the nature of the sediment on the shoreline. You know, erosion of the backshore of those bluffs feeding in, nice low elevation. It was used for landing canoes traditionally, and a much different site than we see today. Here's the history of kind of the shift. So the star marks kind of where that pocket beach is over time. 1954 in the top left, down to 1966 and over to present day. You just see these two bays being filled in. So Lime Bay on the left in the 1954 photo and Mud Bay on the right in the top left panel. Both of those bays being filled in drastically, Mud Bay on the right completely being filled in, Lime Bay substantially being filled in. The right panel shows the historic shoreline, the 1954 shoreline, and just how much of that was lost. So when we came with partners, this became, you know, pretty paramount. How can we bring some of that beach complex back in what limited space we have? So we got to work, you know, we got our permits through, we engaged with all the different partners, and we did the first phase, which was removing a lot of the concrete. It was used as a landfill for many years. We removed all the concrete, metal, rebar, asphalt, all the nasty things that were basically on the shoreline, and just scraped the top layer off because it was just so nasty. And then we brought in fresh nourishment material. So an engineered mix of alluvial sands and gravels, brought in specifically tailored for forage fish and kind of the habitat that they enjoy. And we would watch it for a year. So there's kind of a before and after shot of that first phase. You know, working with the Songhees Nation, the Esquimalt Nation, we did some monitoring and just some basic forage fish sampling exercises. So there it is, the samples of the beach that potentially have eggs in them being whirled through to make a smaller sample, which is then looked under a microscope. And lo and behold, I think less than a month after that first phase was completed, we found smelt eggs on the beach, and it was a huge success and surprise. We were just doing it kind of as a training exercise, and eggs appeared, which was, you know, really great and exciting moment for everyone involved. We watched it over the year, kind of did some monitoring and created plans for the next phase, which involved digging into the back shore area. And part of this was to ensure that the smaller substrates would be able to last and stand there over the big storms that we have. And part of it also was working with the Songhees. They wanted a place to be able to land their canoes. And in order to get those kind of elevations and softer sediments, we need to dig into the back shore a bit. There was some midden in the back shore and some cultural material. So working closely with them on this component was extremely critical. The second phase happened early last summer. We dug out the back shore. There's that dark midden soil on the back shore area there to create a little bit more room in that back shore area. And then we re-nourished that back shore area, created a rock wall to further hold in those archaeological sediments and soils. So a hybrid approach here, but really just reinforcing that bedrock that exists naturally. And then there's that tree in behind there, so we couldn't encroach any further on that tree. So, you know, enhancing the beach area, yes, we're using rock stone wall, which is kind of a hard shore technique, but using these nourishment pieces and backshore plantings as well. So we use the midden soil. We sampled it and analyzed it for suitability for planting. It came back as gold. It was just wonderful. You couldn't ask for a better growing medium in these cultural soils. We found, you know, all sorts of shell and calciums in there. And so, yeah, we planted dune grass in the sand to help hold those substrates against the bigger storms, and planted many different native kind of pollinator and different species for habitat along the backshore there, some trees and shrubs. Yeah, and that would, hopefully those will grow in and create some really nice backshore habitat where there was just kind of invasive species before. Since then, in completion, it's been really fun to watch the public come down. We've also created that access in the very back of the beach, a pathway. Of note, kind of, you know, it's interesting working with these different partners and what's possible in urban settings, working with a city. You know, you have, and with nation, and, you know, from a biologist standpoint, you have one idea of what the project design would be, and then you bring in other people's, and there's compromises that are made, but in the end you come up with I think a really, what is a better product than any one just stakeholder group in terms of working in these areas. So we have universal access down to the beach. The plants are doing really well thanks to the City of Victoria and their natural areas team. They've taken up management of that, and they're really building capacity within the city to be able to do native plantings in their natural areas and maintain them, which is incredible. And a really important and key piece is the maintenance of these nature-based solution projects. What happens after they're built or they're completed? Who's going to take care of them? Do they know how? Certainly for the rain gardens, it requires an entirely different methodology in terms of maintaining these than you would, you know, a normal city garden. So yeah, there's a little bit of a shift in paradigm and training in terms of what's involved with these nature-based solutions as opposed to some of the more traditional that we see. As intended by the BC Stewardship Centre and the Pacific Salmon Foundation and ourselves, the site's become a real hub for education of other practitioners and local government and the public, with many different tours happening there. We were down there for the Coastal Zone Conference on a field trip. I've led UVic students down there. DG recently had some local politicians. Kyla from the Pacific Salmon Foundation's had a number of different stakeholders and practitioners down there. So it's really become this hub of education and demonstration, which was the intent. So it's fantastic to see that. The marina, that very fancy white building you see in the back there, also was able to kind of work with their partners to commission and raise a very beautiful pole. And on that pole raising ceremony, canoes landed in the bay with drumming and singing and ceremonies, which was really satisfying to see. I love going down there and seeing the use. And with that, I'm probably out of time. I didn't set a timer, but thank you all for your interest, and I'm happy to discuss more. Yeah, all the time. I love talking about this stuff. Thanks to our partners and sponsors. And yeah, I could talk for hours on this. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kyle. I love that you had a combination of projects from the rain gardens, which of course addresses the Green Shores principles about, the upland portion and reducing aquatic pollution, and to the practical end of things for the, looking at the Songhees Walkway Pocket Beach project. So thanks very much. So if you want to stop sharing screen, that would be great. Perfect. And now we have some time for questions. And I see we've got one. And yeah, Emilie, if you want to turn your screen back on, that's great. So we have the first question, and it is from Joshua saying to Kyle, and I think, Emilie, you might be able to speak to this as well. So good to see mobilization of volunteers and the active participation of junior youth and youth groups. And Kyle, specifically curious about the long-term upkeep and stewardship of rain gardens.
Yeah, certainly. So that's always the biggest challenge, I think, in terms of us as a community group coming in and wanting to build these pieces of infrastructure, whether you're working with the school district or a municipality or a landowner, is who's going to take care of this thing once it's built. And for us, in the city, in our region, Victoria, I've never seen so many volunteers. Like, there's so many volunteers here that we have a really tough time keeping them busy and giving them enough activities and things to do. We have a 20-year history in the area with that kind of climate of volunteers. So what we try to do is, work with those friends of groups. In the case of those two, the rain garden sites that I presented on, that would be the Friends of Bowker Creek, have an incredible capacity to take care of these things. So with the school and the students and our education programs, working with the teachers and students, with the Friends of Bowker Creek and their volunteers, able to kind of come together and adopt these sorts of things. That's another strategy, is an adopt a rain garden program. So you kind of have these adopt a rain garden programs where communities come out and basically work on that. And it's good for mental health. It's good for exercise. It's good for learning. People really enjoy doing it. It's good community building. But it is a challenge. And that's the other piece too, is you almost have to sell these things a little bit in terms of they are lower maintenance than a traditional garden. I mean, you're planting them to be drought tolerant. You're planting them to be flood tolerant. You're planting them to be low maintenance. And a lot of times what districts want to do is just go in and brush saw them all and do that kind of hedge trimming and motorized kind of quick in and out, but constant maintenance. And for these, it's much slower. It's very, you have some mulching parties, seasonally, maybe once or twice a year, where you have some cleanup where you need to clean the intakes before the big rains and kind of clear that area out and make room for the water to come in. And you have a little bit of, once they're established, you have a little bit of kind of maintenance on the plants. And that's hand pruning and kind of, general weeding and upkeep like that. So it's not as much maintenance as people think it is, especially if you have community involvement and uptake in the project.
Right. Thank you so much. And Emilie, do you have, you work quite a bit with volunteers as well?
Yeah, it's pretty similar for us. When we do a community project, like our Shore Up project, it ends up being that community and those volunteers who are caring for it. But because we do the project all together, everyone is gaining those skills while they're doing it. So we as well, at the end of the project, chat about how to monitor it and how to care for it. And so we end up all just sort of having a discussion and deciding who's going to take the lead on caring for the space, especially where we could be doing that project out of province and then we have to return back to Nova Scotia. But it's really great because where everyone is getting that hands-on experience, they can pass it on to other people too and bring them in. And it's not all work that's like not very fun. It's not just like cutting things back and doing physical things, but it's also keeping an eye on the space and seeing what wildlife is returning and logging things like that. So where everyone's got different experience and different interests. It's great because they can bring their passions to that space and people can go back and add to it more and sort of take what they can from the space or what they want to from the space.
Yeah, that's great. So integrating that learning as you go about, how to maintain it afterwards. Thanks for that critical component there. Thank you. We have another question from Danica, or a question from Danica. Excellent presentation, Kyle. Can you speak to the challenges with getting necessary permits that were associated with your Songhees project and how you overcame those and any recommendations? Working in the intertidal zone is very challenging. Also dealing with potentially contaminated fill. There's a nice big one. There's a juicy question there for you, Kyle.
One, contingency funding. So, things pop up on these shoreline projects that no matter how much planning you do, something's going to pop up inexplicably, unavoidably. Something's going to happen. So having, buy-in from your funders, great funders, people like DG and Kyla from Pacific Salmon Foundation and BC Stewardship Center that are kind of aware of that and understanding of that and can be flexible in that in terms of timelines and funding. The other piece is having lots of partners. There's resilience in partners in terms of working through that. The amount of times, there's highs and lows, and the amount of times you need to kind of be picked up and brushed off going through these things. It's really important to have friends in your corner. But yeah, regulatorily speaking, the province here is kind of, it seems like in a transition. DG's done, and the BC Stewardship Center has done a lot of work in trying to getting that piece solved. Right now, you need the Crown license from the province to be able to work on the intertidal, which, for the purposes of what we're trying to do might not quite fit, but they have, DG has done a really good job of getting that expedited and spread up and getting them thinking about alternative pathways, like the nature-based shoreline permit that is being piloted and was piloted for this project and other projects. Or actually for this project, we were piloting that and then realized that the city had the rights to the water lot. So we were able to bypass that completely, which was very nice. Another couple of our projects are sitting with the province right now, and it's a little bit of a black box in there. The federal DFO is really supportive of these projects in terms of they're looking to learn about these methods too, and are building their capacity to regulate them. So really, rather than opposition from federal regulators, we had a lot of buy-in and coming down to site and conversations, which was excellent. The pieces around, we're almost being seen as experts in terms of forage fish ecology, which is one of the things that's at risk at working on these shorelines. So having that piece and recognition that we're taking that piece to heart, like we really care about the forage fish habitat and know a lot about their phenology of spawning and locations and that sort of piece that really helps. I'm rambling a bit. Because we were in a runway, like the float plane runway, aerodome, through Transport Canada, there was a whole other permitting process that I wasn't even aware of until we were very close to building that first phase, which was an interesting kind of scramble, but we were able to kind of get through it on that one. Archaeology as well can be a bit of a black box and can take a long time. Municipal partners can help with that. The City of Victoria did a lot of the archaeological permitting and work for us. It was quite costly, but because they had basically an open site alteration permit, amending those are a lot easier than starting from scratch here in the province and in BC. And yeah, so I guess, you can do your deep dives and try to figure out how many permits there are and get started on them as soon as possible. And reaching out to your officers and getting in the system as soon as possible. Often they won't accept your application until it's complete, but if you're actually on their radar and you have someone that you can talk to, that can be very helpful, and starting that process early. And yeah, that's something I need to do. I'm often, throwing up Hail Marys. I feel like for these projects, people, planners, regulators are really supportive and they want to help. So you just got to give them the ability to help within the confines of what they're doing in terms of regulating developers and other activities that might not have habitat first and foremost in mind. So yeah, just giving those folks a chance to help you is often the best course of action, and making sure they have an opportunity to be able to do that. You'll find that people are really supportive and do really want to help. So as long as you don't handcuff them with a late application or a complete oversight of an application, then typically you'll be okay.
Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Kyle. And I think we have time for one more question, and it's for Emilie. This is from Kelly. Would be interested to hear about how we all as shoreline practitioners can help facilitate the mind shift necessary for landowners to develop their relationship with their land.
So this is a really good one. I think one of the best ways to do it is to get them more involved, hands-on with it. Oftentimes there are people that just due to their current abilities or due to the time constraints, they're not able to carry out the project or be involved every step of the way. But even if they can just observe what's happening, I think that's really beneficial. But with that, sort of taking into account what things are most important to them. If they're interested in harvesting things, or if they like to drink tea, sort of implementing species that can be used for that, so that there's a reason for them to more often be out there and to actually be touching things and to feel that benefit from it. Oftentimes when people feel the benefit, they realize that it is sort of like a living system. It can be about, if they're really into birds, attracting more songbird species, attracting in more pollinators, or even just encouraging them to spend 5 minutes a day in that space and observe it and take notes on it and watch the way that it changes every season. Because when you see those changes from month to month, you can see that it really is a living system that's shifting. So I think it's really them spending time in that space and finding what the value is to them of that space too.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thanks very much. Well, we're just about out of time. I'm just going to share my screen. So what's next? So within the next few days, we'll email a recording of the presentation as well as some resources. But in the meantime, we're trying to get a handle on how we did. If you have a moment now to use that QR code, we just have a short survey. And then we also are putting the link to the survey in the chat, as well as with our follow-up email to you. It just gives a sense, especially because this is the first in a series of webinars, so that how we can be a little bit more address your concerns and requirements for these types of webinars. So with that, I'd like to just thank everybody for your interest in green shores and nature-based solutions, both in the Maritimes and British Columbia. And with that, we'll end our webinar and thank our presenters one more time. They just did an awesome job, so much learning to go on. So thanks again, Emilie and Kyle, and thanks everybody else for attending. Great job, everyone.